So this is the secret to how I halved my handicap in 1 year. Now I know what you're thinking, he's a pro, he doesn't have a handicap, what you're on about, but many years ago I managed to drop my handicap from 14 to 7 in 1 year using this one very simple tip which I use in my coaching with all my students today, and I want to pass on to you as I strongly feel this will help benefit your game and lower your scores in the exact same way. So without further ado, let's find out what that is. Now during the mid part of my sort of junior career, towards the last stage of my junior career, I got to a point where I was pretty good off the tee, not long but pretty accurate, hit most fairways, and I can hit a decent ball sort of well enough for my handicap. But I got to a point where I was hitting lots of fairways, very confident with my golf swing, but I couldn't convert that into scores because anything from about 120 yards and in, which for me at the time was a full pitching wedge, was all guesswork, and I was hitting good quality shots in the sense of good strikes, and I was flying it long, I was coming up short, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was getting quite frustrated. So at the time, off my own back, I developed something which I referred to at the time as a knockdown shot, and that was a way that I could reduce my swing in a consistent manner to, at the time, take 20 yards off all of my wedges. And I got pretty comfortable with that, I got pretty confident with that, and I started to take that to the golf course, and that materialised in lower scores because I had more know-how as to what I was doing anytime I had anything less than a full wedge and in. I then furthered that to what I call the wedge matrix, and that is something that I coach to all my students today. And that is a system whereby my distance control became so much more refined that anything from within 120 yards in went from guesswork to now more my scoring zone. And that's what I want to discuss with you guys today. Before we bring the wedge matrix up and discuss how, from a performance point of view, we can use that to help reduce our scores, let's just first discuss the shots that are compromised or within our wedge matrix. So with all our wedges, so in my case I have 4, others might have 3 or 2, we have 3 shots. We have a full shot, a 3/4 shot, and a half shot. And they can be defined in a couple of different ways. How I personally like to define it is by thinking about my lead hand, so my left hand, travelling no further than shoulder height for my 3/4 shots back and through. And for my half shots, again, I like to think about my lead hand, so left hand travelling to my rib cage back and through as well. Some people like to use the clock face method. So again, thinking about my lead hand, so my left hand here is like a clock arm. I would go back to what would be 10 o'clock for my 3/4, or I could swing back to what would be 9 o'clock for my half shots in turn. What these will give you is slightly different flights and slightly different distances, so 3 different flights and distances with each club, which we can add as part of our matrix and essentially tools to our box, which we'll discuss shortly. From a technical point of view, it's actually much simpler than people make it out to be. What a lot of people do, and I was guilty of this in the early days, is to take yardage off or add yardage on. I would set up and swing exactly the same I would be for a full shot, but I would kind of go long and slow and be very inconsistent and accurate to take yardage off, or I'd try and hit the skin out of it to try and find 5-10 yards every now and again. Now, a full shot is a full shot, no different to a 4-7 or a pitching wedge, so that is something that we're all familiar with. But when it comes to the half shots and the 3/4 shots, because we are looking to reduce yardage in a controlled way, no different to our chips and pitches, we just need to adjust our setup ever so slightly. So when we're getting set up, if this was me set up to a full swing, 2 simple things I want to do. I want to reduce my width of stance slightly. I want to go down the grip just a smidge, so gripping it in the middle, nothing too drastic. And the only other change I'm looking to make from there is to move a little bit of my weight into my left side, so about 10% or so at address, and I'm going to keep it there throughout the swing so I can find compression and strike much more simpler from there. These are essentially 2 power levers, so the width of stance and the feet, and no different to the chip, how you'd reduce the 2 same things in order to help control that shorter distance much easier. This is a setup which will help you to make those half and 3/4 shots much more natural. So now that we actually understand what our wedge matrix is, now comes to the part of turning that into performance, turn that into lesser scores to help reduce our handicap. So this is what my wedge matrix here. I've got all my wedges, pitch, gap, sand and lob, and I've got my full, 3/4 and half shot yardages. So the reason why this is so powerful is when we get to distances which aren't full, so where I was at and where many people are at is they just have this kind of side of the matrix, and all this was kind of guesswork. So for me, a 100-yard shot might have just been, I'll just figure it out on a sand wedge or a gap wedge or one day because it doesn't feel like it's as short. It looks further. I might try and hit the skin off a lob wedge, and being very guessworky, and even when I'm stood over the ball, the confidence isn't quite there. So what this gives you is a very systematic approach into wherever your full pitch and wedge is and in, so you can be much more definitive as to how to go about those shots in turn. So now for me, if I've got 80 yards, I can look at my little grid and say, okay, that's a 3/4, 80 degree, and I know that's my shot. And the way we can further this is start to identify what my golden number would be. So your golden number is whatever you feel is kind of your best shot, what is your most accurate shot, and you can kind of refine that further by doing some testing to use statistics to show what your strongest yardage is, something that many tour pros do. So for me, as an example, I know that I'm very good at 100 yards. Statistically, I always hit it the closest. It's a comfortable shot for me as a person anyway, so whenever it comes to situations where it's like a par 5 I can't reach in 3, or a long par 4 because I've got to chip out the trees or it's just quite long, instead of just hitting it as close to the green as possible and trying to figure out from there and having those awkward 40-yarders over the bunker, I want to refer back to my golden number, because I know that statistically I'm more likely to hit that shot much closer than I am a really awkward kind of 40, 50-yarder into the green. So what's really important for us to learn here is, what is the wedge matrix? How do we go about hitting these shots and then turning that into yardage, refining that, getting comfortable with all these yardages, and then we can start to take that to the golf course and be much more systematic, much more methodical, rather than being too emotional to certain clubs that we do and don't like, and start to lower our scores in turn from there. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a comment on the comment section down below, or drop me a follow on my socials. For any online or individual coaching, feel free to give me a follow on the SKILLEST app, search David Atkins and drop me a message on there. But until next time, catch you on the next one.